Welcome back to my channel for a camera lens combination comparison. And this is a video a lot of people asked for, and it took me a while to think about how I actually want to do that video. And what I want to do in this video is I want to provide a fully fledged comparison between the Leica SL3. Don't get irritated by the color. This is the Reporter Special Edition, but it's 100% genuine Leica SL3 and the Hasselblad X2D II, which came to market last year. And it seems that a lot of people spend a lot of thought, which is the better camera for me, for my workflow, for my shooting, for the tasks I have to manage as a photographer. And in this video, I want to compare these two cameras, but I want to compare them, of course, in a camera lens combination. And on the Leica SL3, I have mounted the Vario Elmarit 28 to 70 millimeter. And on the Hasselblad X2D II, I have mounted the 35 to 100 E lens. It's an XCD lens, so it's made for the Hasselblad X and the Hasselblad V cameras. And the reason why I've chosen these lenses, I'm going to explain to you, of course, in the course of the video. And now let's kick this off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, support my work. Many thanks for that. All right, so first of all, my naive assumption is that everyone who watches that video is familiar with these two camera systems, the Hasselblad X system and the Leica SL system. But in case you are not, you find tons of videos about both cameras, both lenses on my channel. And I will try to catch them all together and post them down below as a link in the info box so you can look them up if there is any particular aspect of these cameras or lenses that interests you. Next pre-remark I want to do is that the Hasselblad X2D II sensor is kind of almost exactly the same as the sensor in its predecessor, the Hasselblad X2D. And some time back, I already provided a video in two parts where I compared the SL3 with the Hasselblad X2D. Not the Mark II, but the X2D. And for these type of comparisons, you need about half an hour of technical background. And I've collected everything you need to know in a part 1 video back then. I will not repeat a lot of what I said back then. I will just assume that you understand the difference between two sensor sizes, medium format, full frame cam, and that you understand what a crop factor is and all of that. I really want to do this fairly quickly, but quickly doesn't mean it will be a short video because I have a lot to say to these two camera systems. And I think now we are ready to go right to the core of the topic, and I will start with a quick sensor comparison in the Leica SL3 compared to the Hasselblad X2D II. Both cameras are system cameras, so we can remove the lenses. Let's do that quickly. Let's get the 35 to 100 E lens off. Let's put it here. And then you get a nice view into the sensor. Let's do the same on the Leica SL3. And also here, we have a beautiful sensor. Now, if we look at the two sensors, you will see it a little bit here. There's clearly a size difference. And we have here a medium format sensor with 44 times 33 millimeter dimensions. We have here a full frame sensor with 36 times 24 millimeter dimensions. And the common belief is that the larger a sensor, the better the image quality. Now, image quality is not made solely by means of the sensor. Image quality also comes, of course, with the lenses you use. Image quality is driven by the firmware and the image processing, the data processing, the signal processing, and so on. But just from a pure physics perspective, a larger sensor always gives you an advantage. Another difference coming from the physics of these two sensors is the aspect ratio. Here in the medium format cam, we have a native aspect ratio of the sensor of 4 to 3. And here in full frame sensors, we have a native aspect ratio of 3 to 2. Now, there are people, and I think highly qualified people, and also experienced-based pro photographers who say there is not really a significant difference between a 44 times 33 millimeter sensor and a 36 millimeter times 24 millimeter sensor. And in your daily shooting, I don't think that is a completely wrong statement. But from a technical perspective, there is a consistent difference, a significant difference between the performance of the Hasselblad X2D Mark II sensor and the Leica SL3 sensor. And before I show you that, I also want to add that both sensors here are so-called CMOS BSI sensors. BSI stands for backside illuminated, and that is a feature of the architecture of the sensor which helps the camera to perform better in low light situations. So let's talk about dynamic range, and what I mean here is photographic dynamic range, and the resource I'm using is from photons2photos.net, which is my personal page to go to if I want to have lab environment driven measurements. Not marketing voodoo from the manufacturers where people talk in the data specifications about 14 to 15 stops of dynamic range, but truly measured photographic dynamic range. And what we find here is that the blue curve, which is the one from the Hasselblad X2D Mark II 100C, is consistently on top of the curve, which is black here, of the Leica SL3. And that means there is a significant advantage of this larger sensor in the Hasselblad X2D Mark II compared to the full frame sensor we have in the Leica SL3. And there's a lot of information here. I will not cover everything, but I want to give you with that takeaway that the Hasselblad X2D Mark II curve is consistently better. I want to give you a few points to remember which will help you to decide about which is the better sensor. And first of all, the native ISO or base ISO of the Leica SL3 is an ISO of 100. And we get here a photographic dynamic range, I call it PDR from now on, of 11.24 as measured by photons2photos. The native ISO of the Hasselblad X2D Mark II is 50. It used to be 64 on the X2D and now they improved it to 50. And you see this is in everything we see here in this chart is the peak PDR of 12.46. But we are still on both cameras significantly away from the manufacturer's specifications of dynamic range here. And what we see is at an ISO of 100, which is the native ISO of the SL3, but not of the X2D Mark II, they come pretty close. So we talk about the dynamic range on the Leica of 11.24 versus 11.61 on the X2D Mark II. And that is pretty close, of course. And we see here that then there is a continuous decrease of photographic dynamic range for the Leica SL3, an increase between 200 and 400. Here we had an ISO of 400. And then it consistently, in an almost straight linear curve, declines down to the maximum ISO, which is for the Leica SL3, an ISO of 102,400. And the Hasselblad X2D Mark II stops much earlier in its ISO range, namely here at 25,600. And there is an interesting pattern here on these three data points. And what it means is we have from an ISO of 6,400 on, we have an ISO invariant behavior. It doesn't matter whether you shoot the X2D Mark II at an ISO of 6,400 or 12,800 or 25,600, you always get the same plateaued here, consistent photographic dynamic range. And that is very interesting. And these curves, they basically show that the Hasselblad is in all ISO values we have here on the x-axis. So you see this starts at the native ISO for the Hasselblad X2D Mark II with 50 and then increases up to the 100, 2,400 for the Leica SL3. And on all of these ISO values, we have the Hasselblad X2D Mark II dynamic range being on top of the Leica SL3. Let's now look into read noise in digital numbers versus ISO settings. So on the x-axis, we have ISO values. On the y-axis, we have the read noise. And you also find here, in contrast to the chart before, that there is a -16 on the Hasselblad camera, a -14, and that refers to the number of bits in the ADC output, and ADC stands for analog digital converter. And what we see in this chart is actually pretty straightforward. It shows that the Leica SL3 achieves much lower read noise than the Hasselblad X2D II, especially at the base ISO, if we look here, and then also in the extended ISO range here, which goes down to 50 for the Leica SL3. And the reason why Leica has this splendid curve is highly likely due to aggressive analog gain processing, while the X2D II on the blue curve here carries noticeably higher read noise across the whole ISO range. By the way, here we have this ISO invariance again. So between an ISO of 6,400, 12,800 and 25,600, you get consistently the same read noise here. But moving from this ISO invariant part of the curve back to the overall curves in the comparison, why do we see in the chart before that the photographic dynamic range of the X2D II is consistently better than that of the Leica SL3 if the read noise behavior actually points towards an advantage of the Leica SL3? Well, let me try to explain. Both cameras have almost identical pixel sizes. So the pixel pitch of the Leica SL3 sensor is 3.79 micrometer, and on the X2D II it's 3.76 micrometer. So we talk about 3.79 versus 3.76, which we call, give or take, identical. So individual pixels collect light in essentially the same way on both sensors, the full frame and the medium format sensor. But the X2D II's dynamic range advantage does not come from the pixel size, but from its much larger sensor area, which captures more total photons for the same framing and exposure. And when images are then normalized or printed at the same size, that extra photon count lets noise average down more efficiently, preserving cleaner shadows, smoother tones. All right, I want to stop here talking about dynamic range. The dynamic range of the X2D II is consistently better, the photographic dynamic range, than what you get on the Leica SL3, but the curves are pretty close together. And there are different nuances here and there, like the ISO invariance, which I showed you on the X2D II between 6,400 and 25,600 ISO. And I want to conclude here for that particular topic when it comes to the sensor comparison. There is one more thing I want to add, namely the crop factor between these two sensors is an 0.79. And that's why I've chosen these lenses. So if you look here at the focal length spectrum, we get 35 millimeter, then applying the crop factor gives us a 28 millimeter focal length, or field of view, I should more precisely say, on a full frame sensor. So the full frame equivalent focal length for 35 millimeter on the 44 times 33 millimeter sensor is 28 millimeter on a 36 times 24 millimeter sensor here on the Leica SL3. And if we go to the extreme tail end here, we have 100 millimeter calculatory. This would be an 80 millimeter full frame equivalent focal length on a full frame sensor. But de facto, if you look into the spec sheet, if I remember correctly, it's around 76 millimeter. And that's why these two lenses on these two sensors are pretty comparable. We have here 28 to 70 millimeter, and in the full frame equivalent field of view setup, we have here also 28 to, let's call it, 76 millimeter on the Hasselblad X2D II. And by the way, it's also pretty obvious that a lot of people, although they are aware that prime lenses are generally a bit more superior when it comes to image quality on camera bodies, that the zoom lenses here provide a lot of flexibility. And that one here probably is currently one of the most desired lenses on planet Earth, because a lot of people ordered it but are still waiting. Supply is just coming in so slowly, and I was lucky to have it from the very beginning. On my camera body here is one of my most favorite currently used camera lens combinations, a camera lens combination I shoot very often, also for professional jobs I need to get done. And the same applies here to the Leica SL3. A lot of people will have here the 24 to 70 millimeter lens, which gives you a bit more on the wide angle spectrum of the focal length range here. but I like the 28-70 due to its size and compactness and weight. And the image quality, I've shown a couple of videos with sample images on my channel with that lens, is really good. And by the way, I come back to image quality between these two cameras in a comparison way in the course of the video, of course. Let's now talk about design, build quality, robustness, weather sealing, all of that of these camera lens combinations. And first of all, if we look at the two cameras, they are pretty similar in terms of size. So I don't think that anyone can say that I prefer the Hasselblad over the Leica because of size or vice versa. I think they are pretty much comparable. The SL3 camera body is a bit higher in this dimension and is here, if you go away from the electronic viewfinder here, which is built in here, lower in this dimension. But overall, also if you look here in the horizontal dimension, they are pretty much the same. If you look into the depth of the camera body is pretty much the same. So in terms of size, if we look at the camera body only, there is not much to compare. They are very, very comparable and similar. Now, the lenses, of course, they make a big difference. And the big advantage, and I just mentioned that a minute before, of the 28-70 is it has a really good image quality, but it is pretty compact and pretty lightweight. And I'm going to basically put the camera bodies and the lenses on a scale in a moment, so you will see this. And for me, a big advantage of the Leica SL3 is it has a certified IP weather resistance rating. For the Hasselblad X2D II, I personally strongly believe you can shoot it in nasty weather conditions, but we don't really know. And for the Leica SL3, Leica actually issues an IP rating. It's an IP54, which guarantees that the camera is dust-proof and splash waterproof. And you have kind of this, I'm not sure I should call it a guarantee, but you have this certification from Leica with IP54 that this camera is fully weather sealed. And most of that applies also to L-mount lenses, which you can mount here on the camera body. Now, both lenses have a rubber sealing. Let me quickly show you. So here you see the rubber sealing along the lens mount, and that protects water to intrude between the lens and the camera body. And the same is true for the XCD lenses from Hasselblad. Let me show you here. Let's unmount this. And if we look here, there is the rubber sealing. So we don't have a specification from Hasselblad for the camera body and for the lenses, but I personally strongly believe this is almost equivalent or comparable what we have in these two camera lens combinations. But if you want to be pedantic, if you want to be on the safe side, if you want to make and claim a warranty case, here you have an IP54. Here you have no IP rating. The build quality of these camera lens combinations is under both brands without any doubt. The Hasselblad is absolutely robust. It looks good. It's a very robust camera body. The same applies to the standard SL3 and in particular also to the Reporter edition, which I have here. This is supposed to be in particular robust and durable material with this Kevlar type structure here on the camera body. And the build quality of the lenses, the camera bodies, and that applies actually to all SL lenses and all XCD lenses, is absolutely fabulous. I have really nothing to complain here, and I would not put one or the other camera lens combination in advantage over the other. If you want to quickly talk about design, now design is always in the eye of the observer. I'm not really sure whether I like the design of the X2D II over the design of the SL3 and vice versa. The design of both cameras, in my opinion, my subjective gut feeling when I look at these cameras is really nice. I like the design of both cameras. Of course, if you want something special, the X2D, the X2D II, the X1D, the X1D Mark II always did shine when it comes to design. And the standard SL3 is a very beautiful camera here with this Reporter edition. I in particular like the design of the camera body. On both camera bodies, we have a top display. We have a lot of manual or mechanical control elements. on the camera body, which in some parts you can also customize. So we have here a lot of flexibility, creating an individual shooting workflow for your habits and your needs. And that is applicable to both camera bodies here. Not a big difference. What, of course, distinguishes now the Hasselblad X2D a lot, if I look back to my review back then between the predecessor, the Hasselblad X2D, and the SL3, now comparing the X2D Mark II and the SL3, the big difference here is the design feature of a joystick finally. And that was something I called out on all predecessors of the Hasselblad X system. And here we finally have it in the same way as we have it on the Leica SL3 if you look here. And that is just such a blessing. It makes your life so much easier, for instance, to steer an autofocus field if you have a 4-directional joystick and can move the field around here in the same way as here. It's actually not only 4-dimensional, I think you can also go diagonal here. And this is a real game changer for me, one of the big flaws on the predecessor, and here Hasselblad finally solved it. On the Leica SL cameras, it was always there, the joystick, and you can use it for navigating the menu, but also for moving around your focus field and what have you. So this is kind of at par here now in design. And I think in general, if we look at these camera lens combinations, despite the size and weight of the lenses, we have highly comparable camera systems here. So in a sense, if I summarize here, the camera bodies itself, they are very comparable, not only in dimensions, but also in terms of weight, because on the Hasselblad, we measured 844 gram, and on the SL3, 864 gram. So there is just 20 gram in between, which is something I claim you will not feel if you carry the camera. The big difference here in this constellation, of course, are the lenses. We have on the XCD 35-100E 1004 gram in the way I measured them. And here we have only 656 gram. That makes a big difference. Now, there are other candidates I could have used for my comparison here on the Leica SL lens lineup. And for instance, if I remove this for a moment and put it aside and take the very famous, still very often in use, at least in my particular case, 24-90mm Vario Elmarit, which was the very first zoom lens that ever came to the Leica SL system. And all of a sudden, these camera lens combinations are very, very comparable. Look at that. They look almost the same. And here, of course, you have an extended tele range here. You can go up to 90mm. That's not what you have here. The tele range here, if you look at that, is around 76mm in a full frame equivalent setup. So you have here 14mm more, but now they are very much comparable. And of course, this Vario Elmarit 24-90mm is also much heavier than the very compact low weight 28-70mm. So in terms of weight, you can play. It depends a lot on the lenses. The camera bodies itself are almost indistinguishable when it comes to weight. I don't think there is any other point I want to make on design, weight, durability, weather resistance, what have you. I mentioned it all. And I think we can now turn our attention to the inner values of these two camera systems and talk about the menu system, features, and what have you. Now let's switch the cameras on and let's start to look into the internals here. And let's boot up the Hasselblad. And the first big difference here I want to call out is that the Hasselblad X2D Mark II has a card slot for compact flash express type B in the same way as the Leica SL3. If you look here, here's the compact flash express type B card. But the Leica has, in addition, an SDXC Mark II card slot for SD cards. And that is compensated, and many people will say by far compensated, by internal memory on the Hasselblad X2D Mark II. And if we go here into the menu and we go to storage, we have here the internal SSD with 949 GB of usable memory. And that is huge. And by the way, if you process large file sizes like you do here with 100 megapixel RAW files, you will appreciate the transfer rates, and the transfer rates to the internal memory, to the internal SSD, they are super fast. Of course, to compact flash express type B, it's also super fast on both cameras. We saw the slots a moment ago. But a lot of people will appreciate that here you have an internal SSD with about 1 terabyte of storage available. And that is storage you cannot forget, right? I mean, here you could accidentally move out and try to shoot the camera outside in the field and forgot the cards, then you are basically done. You can just hop back in the car and drive back. Here you have memory with you, which you cannot accidentally leave in the studio or at home. You always have 1 terabyte available. Of course, then you cannot go on secondary storage for backup, because you have no backup if there's no card in here, but you always can rely on the internal SSD. That is the first big difference between the two camera systems. I don't want to go into the design of the menu systems. The Leica SL3 just got a huge update with firmware 4.0.0. A lot of convergence between the Q platform and the SL platform. And both camera systems actually have a reasonably compact menu system, which is not overly complex, but reduced to the minimum requirements you would have as a pro photographer on a menu system. It's not as complex as menu systems on Canon, Sony, Nikon, Fuji, what have you. It's really overseeable. It doesn't take more than a couple of hours if you are new to the system to get used to the menu system. Both screens here have touch functionality, and that is something a lot of people appreciate. And in general, in the menu system, you will get along with both menu systems very well. In terms of features, there is one feature where the Hasselblad X2D II clearly is ahead of the curve compared to the SL3, and there is some other feature where the SL3, in my opinion, is superior. And let's go quickly into drive mode here on the SL3. Let's go here to drive mode, and then we have here single, continuous shooting, interval shooting, exposure bracketing, and both of these important features, so interval shooting for time lapses, for instance, and exposure bracketing, they are also on the Hasselblad X2D II. If we go here into the drive mode, we have here continuous, we have the self timer, that's a different menu entry on the SL3. We have intervalometer functions for time lapses, and we have exposure bracketing. But the Hasselblad X2D II has a feature which is absolutely essential for macro shootings, and that is focus bracketing. And I personally do not understand why on Leica cameras we don't have that, because it's something which can clearly be implemented in the firmware and should be straightforward to do. The Hasselblad X2D II has it, and I used it various times already in close-ups and macro shootings, and the Leica SL3 does not have it. But there is some completely different feature which the SL3 has, and which the X2D II has not, and that's the multi-shot feature. And that feature came newly to the SL3 with firmware upgrade 4.0.0. And finally, you can shoot here up to 240. And if every megapixel counts, if you need prints 4 meter times 1 meter 50, like I had to deliver 3 of them very recently to a client, then you will appreciate that every megapixel counts. And then the multi-shot option here is only on the SL3, is not on the X2D II. Here you have 100 megapixel natively, and the multi-shot model, which takes you up to 400 megapixel, is something that will very likely come to that camera in the future. We have seen it in one video on YouTube, which I discussed in some other video I posted some time back, but the feature is still not available on the X2D II as a regular function in the menu. And here the SL3 has a clear advantage. If it comes to macro shootings, close-up or special landscape requirements, you have here focus bracketing. That will be a function you will love to have, and this function you don't have on the SL3. So there are tiny little nuances and differences. The bread and butter of photography is on both cameras in terms of features and functions, but here you have a multi-shot option. Here you hope that the multi-shot option will come once in a while, but after being announced a long time ago, it's still not available in the menu. Let's quickly talk about in-body-image-stabilisation. And let's go here in the menu of the Leica SL3. And then you have your noise reduction. Perspective control, by the way, is also a feature you only have here. I need to make another video about that function because there is something going on which a lot of people will not be aware of. But I will come back with a short video on that perspective control feature here. That is basically for correcting falling lines, getting all the lines straight if you shoot architecture, buildings, what have you. And that is a feature the Hasselblad X2D II has not implemented. But we have stabilization on both cameras, and you see it here. We have image stabilization, can be switched on or off. Then I switch it on again, and you can also say here what the panning mode is, normal or auto panning, if you want to freeze some motion and pan with the camera into the scene. And here you have it in a dedicated menu entry also. We go back here, and then we have stabilization, which is here. And here you can switch it on. Currently it's activated. You can switch it off. And also here you have the stabilization mode, and you can switch here into different shooting situations. And you can, if you mount third-party lenses, specify the focal length, which on the Leica SL3 is also possible, but it's under camera settings, I believe. Let's go there. Where do we have the camera settings here? And then if we scroll down, we find somewhere here the lens profiles. Currently grayed out because I have a native SL lens mounted here. But in the lens profiles, I can actually manually dictate the camera the focal length of an unknown lens, which is maybe mounted here with a third-party adapter. And then in-body image stabilization on both cameras will work like a charm as long as the camera knows the focal length. And in terms of how many stops you gain, realistically for me, that depends on how calm your hands are. And on the Leica SL3, I get about 5 full stops of gain, 4 to 5 full stops if I shoot longer exposures handheld. On the Hasselblad X2D II, I can do much better. And I posted a video very early after the camera was introduced to market, where I tested the in-body image stabilization, and I was able to shoot exposures handheld up to 3 seconds. Here with lenses which are not super wide angle, I typically have to give up at an exposure time of 1 second. So if you are a low light shooter, if you have calm hands and want to accelerate that and enhance it even further with the in-body image stabilization by saving the weight of a tripod in your luggage, you will be better off, a bit better off with the Hasselblad X2D II, because in-body image stabilization here is just insane. I've never seen such an IBIS as in the X2D II. Here it works reasonably well. On both cameras, it also depends on the focal length of the lens you have mounted. The longer the focal length, the more difficult it is to shoot longer exposures handheld. Regarding the menu, the functions, the features, there is not much more to say. As I mentioned before, all the essentials, the bread and butter pro photographers need for their work is on both cameras. Here we have a multi-shot mode. Here we know that it is possible, but no one except one guy has seen it live. It's not there yet in the firmware. Might come in the future, hopefully. I'm still hoping for 400 megapixel single frames with the Hasselblad X2D II. And everything is quite comparable. Here you have no focus bracketing. That is a real miss by Leica. I think it would be so easy to implement it. Here you have it, but in general, very comparable. What I forgot to mention quickly is here the interfaces to the human being who is operating the camera. So the LCD screen, I don't have to come here with specifications. I provided that all when I posted my introductory videos on both cameras. But here you see the LCD screen is substantially larger. But there is also a different aspect ratio for reviewing images. Here you have a 4:3 coming from the medium format sensor. Here you have a 3:2. And then on the electronic viewfinder, both have diopter control. Here it works electronically. You have to look into the EVF to do your adaptions. Here you can use the wheel here for diopter control if you look here. But the specifications of the electronic viewfinder, they are also kind of the same. It's on both cameras, an OLED EVF, and it has 5.76 million dots. Let's also quickly talk about image quality, and I also want to show you some sample images which I have shot with both camera lens combinations. Both camera lens combinations I used in tents in the past. These are both camera lens combinations which are go-to models for me. I really use them for pro photography, but also for my own recreation or when I'm on travel. And of course, image quality does not only depend on the camera and the sensor, it also depends on the lenses mounted. And you have in both camera systems excellent prime lenses and excellent zoom lenses. In the tele area, that is a caveat I need to make, you have much more options on the Leica SL3 camera because you are playing in the L-mount alliance. You also have here a tele lens up to 280 millimeter. And you can use teleconverters, which you also have here, but in a more limited, restricted way. And you get, of course, from Sigma, for instance, tele lenses up to 600 millimeter, what have you. And so if you are into bird photography, wildlife, what have you, you will reach the limits with the Hasselblad X system very quickly. Whereas on the Leica SL system, you have the whole L-mount alliance at your disposal when it comes to lenses. And that is a big advantage, of course. So for both camera lens combinations, I will show you now a few sample images. What I can say, I don't want to do a lot of pixel peeping here or looking at the edges. With the right lens mounted, and both zoom lenses here are absolutely brilliant, you will get terrific image quality out of both camera lens combinations. And you will look at the usual criteria: sharpness, let's call the deepness of the pixels, how much can you crop in. The resolution here, of course, is 100 megapixel and here natively 60 megapixel. So you have a difference here in resolution. I mentioned that repeatedly. But the images are very good if you understand your business and you know how to operate these cameras. And with most lenses, basically with all lenses in the SL system and also in the Hasselblad X2D system with the XCD lenses, you will get great sharpness, great contrast, great micro contrast, and in this way enjoy your footage. One important feature I forgot to mention so far, but want to quickly cover, is the focus system of both cameras. And before the Hasselblad X2D Mark II was introduced, when I compared the SL3 with the X2D system, two major differences were the joystick, which is now here and was always there on the SL system, but also the autofocus system. We had no continuously updating autofocus on Hasselblad X cameras before this camera was introduced by Hasselblad. Now it's there and it works reasonably well. I still owe you guys an autofocus tutorial and also sample images. I was testing the autofocus, continuous autofocus, so AFC, I should say, a lot on the Hasselblad X2D Mark II, and I'm pretty pleased with the results. Nevertheless, I think that the now improved with firmware 4.0.0 autofocus system on the Leica SL3 is superior to what you have on the Hasselblad X. And there are various reasons why this is the case. You know, part of it is due to software, firmware improvements. I was blown away when I realized how much Leica just improved the autofocus system here, the tracking and the subject detection based on improved algorithms in the software, in the firmware of the camera. And here we now have AFC, continuous autofocus, we have face, body detection, all these type of features, but it is still not as quick as what you have on the Leica SL3. And maybe one contributing factor to this also is that you have here 100 megapixel and here you have 60 megapixel, and lower resolution sensors tend to be a bit quicker in autofocus, which is something we also observe when we compare the Leica SL3 with the Leica SL3S. Still, the SL3S is a bit more snappy when it comes to autofocus. But in general, All the capabilities, the AI training, the subject detection, all of that is now on both cameras. So my comparison between the SL3 and back then the X2D compared to now the SL3 with the X2D Mark II is a big difference, because this camera is so much improved compared to what we had with its predecessor. All right, last but not least, let's quickly talk about pricing, because that is a relevant criteria too. So let's feed in the X2D Mark II at B&H. What do we get? $7,400 US. That's the camera body only. What about the Leica SL3? Let's go to the SL3. 7,485. So pretty close, I would say almost at par. You don't save money if you choose full frame format sensor over medium format sensor or vice versa. It's about the same, you know, it's $84, $86 in between, something like that. And let's look at the lenses. Let's look at the XCD 35-100E. Here we go. That lens is priced at $4,600, but you can only request a stock alert. I mentioned earlier in the video that lens is very rare and production is very slow. Let's look at the Vario Elmarit, and this is a 28-70, and here we already go. And here we have, this is only a price tag of $1,890 US. It's f2.8 constant aperture, and that is of course much cheaper. But as I already showed you when we talked about dimensions, size, weight, if you go for the more posh standard zoom in the Leica SL lineup, so that's the Leica Vario Elmarit, and this is a 24-90. Here we go. Then you are priced at $6,310 US. And of course, the 28-70 is a very affordable lens, very compact, very low weight, very nice in terms of fit and match to the camera body of the Leica SL3, and has nevertheless really good image quality. But if you go to these, let's say, more bulky lenses in the Leica camp, you're even significantly above the price tag of what you pay for the Hasselblad. I think one of the most expensive lenses for the Hasselblad system is the XCD 20-35E. Let's have a look what the price tag is on that lens. See, that's $5,929 US. That is more on the upper end for a Hasselblad XCD lens. And you know, concluding here, if you look at the camera body only, almost at par. Leica is a bit more expensive. We talk about a give or take $85 US difference here. On the lenses, of course, it depends what you choose. There are more expensive lenses, there are less expensive lenses. If we would decide for the standard zoom on the Leica, which is the 24-70 Vario Elmarit, and let's go here, then we are already at $3,205 US, which is still cheaper than the 35-100E XCD lens from Hasselblad, but is of course much more expensive than the one we have here on the camera body, which is the 28-70 millimeter. So in terms of pricing, you know, I'm not so sure if pricing really is a distinction criteria for these two camera systems. They are both highly priced, they are both very valuable, and of course, depending on the lens you pick, you will pay more or less. All right, that's it. What camera system is better? Honestly, I don't know. At the very end, it boils down to your shooting habits, your brand affinity, you know, the way you can use a camera lens combination to design your workflow. And what I can say is, and you saw it in the dynamic range curves, although the Hasselblad X2D Mark II is consistently across all ISO sensitivities better in photographic dynamic range, the Leica SL3 comes very, very close, despite its smaller sensor. And in terms of features, it's also personal preferences. You know, I know some photographers who rely all the time on focus bracketing. If you don't have focus bracketing, it's a no-go. Here you have it, here you don't have it. In terms of resolution, clearly 100 megapixel gives you much more reserves. And you will also, in certain shooting situations, in particular in people photography, appreciate the slightly more shallow depth of field you can generate with a larger sensor area as you have it here in medium format compared to a full frame sensor. But at the very end, all these criteria, including image quality, I just showed you some of the sample images. They are just both good. These camera systems both are excellent. And at the very end, it boils down, do you want to shoot a Leica or do you want to shoot a Hasselblad? And which of the two camera systems will better suit your needs and your workflow? If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.